Dante Salvator was not a man given to mercy on wedding days until he saw her. His offer was simple: marry him for 1 year, wear his name, stay under his protection, and no one in that church would ever dare call her abandoned again. 12 months, 1 ring, 1 public vow. In return, he promised safety, silence, and revenge on the man who humiliated her. Her rules were simpler: no lies about what he was, no pretending this was love, and no touching her because he pitied her. But before the first hour of that marriage was over, both of them had already broken something. Because Adriana Morley did not collapse when her groom vanished. She stood in white silk under the gold mouth of the cathedral and lifted her shaking hand to straighten the silver cufflink at Dante Salvator's wrist. No one touched a man like that, not to calm him, not to steady him, not without fear. And the way his eyes changed when she did it, that was the first vow that mattered. The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvator was not his face. It was the soft, metallic click when he fastened one silver cufflink beneath the candlelight, as if the whole cathedral had been waiting for that sound before daring to breathe again. I was still standing at the altar in a white dress I had chosen with my father's ghost in mind. Clean lines, no lace. He had always said too much ornament was for people trying to distract from bad structure. My bouquet had started slipping in my hand an hour earlier. By then the lilies were bruised where my fingers had crushed them. Luca Morti was 43 minutes late to our wedding. At minute 20, whispers started. At minute 30, pity arrived. At minute 43, humiliation became a physical thing. It moved through the pews like cold smoke. Women lowered their eyes and then looked anyway. Men checked their phones, pretending discretion. Father Matteo touched my elbow once and called me child in the careful voice priests use near grief. I was 24 years old, dressed like a promise, and my groom had not merely failed to arrive. He had left me there to be seen. "Signorina," Father Matteo murmured, "perhaps we should." The cathedral doors opened before he finished. "Not Luca. Something far worse for my pulse." Dante Salvator entered with no hurry at all. Men moved before he spoke. Men always did if rumor had told the truth. There were 4 of them with him, each in dark suits cut to hide weapons badly enough to serve as a warning. One of them, a broad-shouldered blonde with a face too expressive for this room, looked around like he expected God himself to start trouble. Dante walked alone down the center aisle. Black suit. White shirt. No tie. A scar disappearing beneath the angle of his collar. His face was hard in the way carved things were hard, still, expensive, and not made to ask permission. The church went so quiet I could hear the beeswax candles spit. Luca's uncle rose from the second pew. "This is a family matter." Dante did not look at him. It was. His gaze landed on me. I should say I was afraid. I was, but not first. First I was furious. Then ashamed that fury was easier to hold than pain. Then aware, in one bright impossible strike, that the cufflink at Dante's left wrist was crooked. He stopped before the altar, close enough that I caught the scent of cold air in his coat, expensive cologne, and something darker underneath, like rain on stone after midnight. "Luca will not be coming," he said. The church inhaled. My throat worked once. "You seem very sure." "I am, because he told you, because my men are already looking for him." There was pity waiting in the room, eager, obscene. I could feel it leaning toward me. My hand tightened around crushed lilies until water ran down my wrist. Dante's attention flicked to that hand, then back to my face. "You can leave with your head down," he said quietly. "Or you can leave as my wife." I thought I had misheard him. "What?" His eyes did not change. "Marry me instead." Somewhere behind him, somebody made a sound like a choked prayer. Father Matteo stared at Dante as if the cathedral itself had spoken blasphemy. Luca's uncle took one furious step forward and stopped when 3 of Dante's men moved at once. The blonde one actually sighed, like this day had become exactly as inconvenient as he had feared. I should have slapped Dante. I should have laughed. I should have told him I would rather burn. Instead, I looked down at his wrist. The cufflink was silver, engraved with a tiny sword through a saint's halo. It sat half-turned, misaligned against the white cuff. My father had taught me that damaged things announced themselves if you knew how to look. So did careless hands. So did lies. This man was neither careless nor lying. My own hand was shaking. I hated that he could probably see it. I hated more that he stood there and let me hate him without flinching. Why? I asked. His answer came after one beat. Because Luca meant this insult to travel. It ends here if you take my name. That was not the whole truth. I heard the missing piece between us like another set of footsteps. But it was enough to understand the shape of the trap, pity forever, or danger immediately. My hand lifted before my mind agreed to it. I reached for his wrist. The nearest bodyguard tensed. Several people gasped. Dante did not move. I set my fingers against the edge of his cuff, feeling the heat of him through starched cotton, and turned the silver piece straight until it clicked neatly into place. The sound was very small. It filled the church. His eyes changed then, not softly, not kindly, but something in them went still in a new way, as if I had stepped into a room inside him nobody visited. There, I whispered, because I did not know why I had done it and needed language to survive it. Nobody had ever looked more dangerous than Dante Salvator did in that second. Then he lowered his head the slightest fraction and said, for me alone, "Little saint." It was not affectionate. It sounded like possession spoken through surprise. I swallowed. If I do this, you tell me the truth before anyone else does. As much of it as I can. That was not the question. His mouth almost changed. Not a smile, something harsher, approval maybe. No lies, he said, and no pity. That time I was certain I saw it. The smallest fracture at the edge of his composure. Agreed. Father Matteo looked like a man standing under a falling ceiling. Adriana, I turned to him with my bouquet of wrecked lilies and heard my own voice from far away. You asked whether we should begin, Father. There were legal questions after that. Witnesses. Shouting, Luca's uncle threatening courts, blood and scandal in rotating order. Dante silenced each one without raising his voice. Papers appeared. Rings were found. Mine slid onto my finger from Dante's hand, cool and mercilessly precise. When it came time for vows, the marble under my heels felt colder than river water. I could not remember half of what Father Matteo said. I remember Dante's hand at my back, never pressing, simply there. I remember his voice when he said I do, low enough to sound like judgment. I remember thinking that if I looked at the pews, I would die of shame, so I looked only at him. Afterward, the cathedral doors opened again, not for rescue but for the life I had just locked behind me. Dante offered his arm. I took it. The church doors closed on the sound of that silver cufflink clicking softly against bone as we walked out husband and wife into a world that had already chosen teeth. My old life ended at the altar. Naples looked indecently alive for the day my life ended. Scooters shrieked through lanes slick with old sunlight. Laundry moved over alleys like surrender flags. Somewhere near the harbor, a woman laughed loudly enough to sound immortal. I sat in the back of a black car beside the man I had married an hour ago and kept my spine straight because collapse, once started, felt impossible to stop. The blonde bodyguard drove. He checked the rearview mirror every 8 seconds and muttered, "I knew I shouldn't have skipped breakfast." Historic disasters always happen when my blood sugar is unstable. Dante said, "Oscar." "Yes, boss. Drive." Oscar lifted one hand from the wheel. "I am driving. I'm also suffering." I stared out the window so they would not see the laugh trying to betray me. My lipstick had probably worn away. My wedding dress rustled every time the car turned. whispering silk against leather like an accusation. Dante had removed his jacket. His forearms were bare where his sleeves had been pushed up once and then forgotten. Veins, scarred knuckles. The silver cufflink I had straightened was gone now, tucked somewhere safe, but I could still hear the click of it in my head. "Where are we going?" I asked. "My house. That sounds temporary." "It is." I looked at him then. "How temporary?" 1 year, so it was a contract after all. Strange that the truth hurt less than uncertainty. "And after that, if you still want to leave, you leave with money, papers, and enough protection that Luca Morty never comes near you again." He said Luca's name as if it had once meant something different and now disgusted him. I folded my hands to keep from touching the ring. "You speak as though he belongs to you." Dante watched the road ahead. "He used to." That answer settled in the car between us like another weapon. I had known Luca for 11 months. We met when he commissioned a restoration at the church where I worked. He was handsome in a polished, easy way, good with widows, better with priests. He brought espresso to my studio, watched me clean soot from old saints, and listened when I talked about pigment layers with what I thought was patience. After my father died, Luca filled the silence by sheer volume. I mistook attention for steadiness. Apparently half the city had known better. The house rose above the sea on a cliff road lined with cypress. Not a house, really. A palazzo stripped down to threat. White stone, iron gates, cameras nested discreetly in carved corners. Men at every entrance pretending to be decorative. When the gates opened, they did it without sound. Oscar parked beneath an arched portico. "Home sweet fortress," he said, then turned toward me with a face made for conspiracy. "For the record, Signora, I did not vote for a wedding today. I like to schedule my panic." "Enough," Dante said. Oscar crossed himself. "See, no gratitude for honesty." Inside, the floors were black and white marble, cool enough to reach through my shoes. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil, old stone, and dinner happening somewhere far away. A woman in her 60s emerged from a hallway wiping her hands on an apron. Her silver hair was pinned back with military severity. Her eyes took in the dress, the ring, my face, and Dante's expression with one sweep so exact it felt surgical. "Madonna Santa," she said. "You brought me a bride with no warning." "Rosa," Dante said. "What? Should I lie because you signed the bills?" She came to me first, not him, and cupped my cheek with flower-warm fingers. "You've had no food, I can tell. Men create tragedy, women get headaches. Come." "I need to speak with her," Dante said. Rosa turned on him. "You married her in the middle of a scandal, and you think your conversation outranks soup." Oscar, still carrying my crushed bouquet for reasons I could not understand, whispered reverently. "This is why nobody wins against Rosa." Dante looked at me. 5 minutes, Rosa sniffed. 7. She needs bread. That was how I learned the first rule of Dante Salvator's house. Only one woman there treated him like a stubborn nephew, and God had clearly signed her permission slip. Rosa took me to a sunken kitchen bright with copper pans and steam. She cut the laces from the back of my dress with kitchen scissors because my fingers could not manage them. I stood in a slip and stockings under yellow light while a stranger undid what another stranger had fastened that morning. "Breathe," Rosa said. "I am, badly." She set tomato broth and torn bread before me and pretended not to see when the first spoonful made my eyes sting. Hunger had become so mixed with shock I could not tell them apart. "He is not gentle," she said at last, "but he is not careless. You make that sound comforting." "It is here." I ate because her hands insisted. When Dante came for me, Rosa handed him a look sharp enough to peel skin, and he ignored it with the skill of a man long accustomed to surviving matriarchs. He led me upstairs to a room bigger than the apartment above my father's old workshop. Pale walls, a carved bed, French doors opening to a blackening sea. My suitcase sat near a chest already delivered. I did not ask how. Men like Dante made logistics look like weather. He remained by the door. Distance. Deliberate. 3 rules, he said. If I tell you to move, you move. If Gianni Vital says a room is not safe, you do not argue. And you do not leave this property without me. That sounds less like marriage and more like supervised detention. His gaze dropped briefly to my bare shoulders, then returned to my face before the look could become anything worse. You can hate the rules after you survive them. I do not know if I hate you yet. His expression stayed unreadable. You will. That should have chilled me. Instead, because my nerves had frayed past good behavior, I said, "You sound very confident for a man I barely know. You know enough." He stepped inside, shut the door, and set something on the dressing table beside me. The silver cufflink, the one I had touched, straightened, remembered. "You dropped this?" I asked. "I wanted you to hear the lock." The key turned in the door behind him, quiet, final. He held my eyes while he did it. No apology, no softening, only the simple fact of control. "Sleep," he said. "You're under my protection now, little saint." Then he left me alone in silk stockings, with bread in my stomach, a locked door at my back, and the metallic ghost of a cufflink between my ribs. I was not free anymore. I woke before dawn to the sea striking rock below the cliff and 6 full seconds of forgetting. Then the ring caught the thin gray light and memory returned whole. I stood at the windows in one of Rose's borrowed nightgowns and watched the horizon turn from iron to pearl. The palazzo was quiet in the dangerous way large houses are quiet when armed men are the ones keeping it so. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened and closed with an expensive hush. Somewhere else, Italian murmured and stopped. There was no panic in me that morning. Panic had burned too bright the day before. What remained was a cleaner thing, a problem. Problems could be examined. I dressed in cream trousers, and a dark blouse Rosa had somehow produced from a wardrobe that fit me too well to be coincidence. On the chair, folded with almost insulting neatness, was a note in angular handwriting. "Gianni will show you breakfast. Do not test the gates. DS no tenderness. No pretense." I hated the flicker of relief that gave me. Gianni Vital turned out to be a heavy-shouldered man in his 50s, with 2 missing fingers on his left hand and the patience of a locked drawer. He was waiting in the hallway, earpiece in place, expression arranged into permanent skepticism. "Signora, do you call all prisoners Signora?" He glanced once at the key still in the outside lock of my bedroom door. "Only the valuable ones." At least he was honest. Breakfast happened in a smaller dining room overlooking the garden. Oscar was already there eating egg whites with the expression of a martyr at a minor saint's execution. Rosa slapped his hand when he reached for sweet bread. "No, Oscar died bravely," he told me. "Remember me as I was, full of potential and carbohydrates." "You're not dead," Rosa said. "Spiritually, I'm fading." Despite myself, I smiled. Oscar pointed like he had won something. "There," the bride smiled. "Someone alert the Vatican." "Adriana," I corrected. He tapped his chest. Oscar Bellini, driver, occasional bodyguard, and victim of an ongoing culinary tyranny. "Also, for the record, I liked you better than Luca by sight alone," Gianni said. "That's because Luca didn't laugh at your jokes." "No. That's because Luca had the eyes of a man who tips badly. I should not have laughed again." It felt disloyal to the version of me still standing at the altar. Yet warmth entered the morning by a side door and I let it, just for a breath. After breakfast, Gianni showed me the lower west wing because, as he put it, if you're going to live in a fortress, you should know which walls matter. The house was half museum, half threat. Old paintings, hidden cameras, prayer candles in alcoves beside bulletproof glass, a library that smelled of leather and storm. Then at the very end of a corridor lined with carved saints, a locked double door. "What's in there?" I asked. Gianni hesitated. "The gallery." I heard the hesitation. "You hear too much." I looked at the hinges, then the security panel beside them. It's temperature controlled. Gianni stared. You're one of those. One of what? People who notice screws. My father restored church paintings for 30 years. I notice anything holding weight. That, perhaps more than the wedding ring, made him take me seriously. He keyed us inside. The room beyond stopped me where I stood. Not because of grandeur, though it had enough. High ceilings, north light, paintings in gilt frames so old the gold had gone almost green in places, carved icons, Madonnas. A triptych blackened at the edges by smoke damage. And at the center, on a freestanding easel beneath a cloth cover, a panel painting of the Virgin and Child I knew immediately. My father restored this, I said. Gianni's gaze sharpened. You're sure? I stepped closer, forgetting him, forgetting caution. The underedge was warped on the lower right. He complained about it for days. He relayed the gesso ground himself because he said the original repair was lazy. I lifted a hand and stopped before touching the frame. You can tell from that distance, Gianni asked. Yes. The cloth had been removed halfway. A crescent of cleaned blue emerged from beneath old varnish. I leaned in farther. The brushwork around the halo was wrong. Not wrong to anyone else, wrong to me. Who cleaned this after he died? No one. Someone tried. I pointed to a dull patch near the halo. This solvent bloom shouldn't be here. Gianni swore softly. I looked at him. My father was working on this before he got sick. Why is it in Dante's house? He did not answer. Which was answer enough. The room behind me changed temperature half a degree. Dante had entered without sound. I felt him before I heard him, a shift in the stillness. The way armed men outside the room went even quieter when he arrived. I turned. He had shed the tie-less severity of yesterday for a charcoal suit. The scar at his neck showed when he moved. His gaze went first to my face, then to the painting, then to the exact inch between my fingers and the frame. Don't touch it, he said. I wasn't going to. You wanted to. That is not a crime. His attention moved to Gianni. Outside, Gianni left at once. I hated the way the room felt smaller with only us in it. I hated more that the feeling had nothing to do with size. This belonged to my father's church, I said. It belonged to a Salvator chapel before that. And now it may be the reason Luca left you standing at that altar. My pulse stumbled. What are you talking about? Dante came nearer the painting, not me, though his shoulder almost brushed mine in the space between. Almost. That kind of almost felt more dangerous than touch. Your father restored more than saints, he said. Sometimes he hid things in what he repaired. Messages, accounts. Leverage? You think my father helped criminals. I think your father helped whoever paid for the church roof, the orphanage repairs, and the medicine when donors vanished. Anger rose. Hot and instant. Do not turn him into a sinner because it suits your story. Dante was silent a moment. I'm telling you he was not a fool. That landed differently. I looked back at the Madonna. My father's hands in the varnish. His cough getting worse that winter. The way he locked the studio twice and told me never to trust men who arrived with polished shoes and soft voices. Luca. The slow horror of being stupid spread through me with elegant cruelty. I can reveal what's under the later varnish, I said. Dante's gaze found mine. Can you? Yes. Without ruining it, a colder woman would have taken offense. I only said my father taught me, not Luca. For the first time, Dante looked surprised, only for a second. But I saw it. I saw everything. Something struck the far window then, a hard crack, like a stone or a shot too distant to trust. Dante moved in front of me so fast, he taught me the sound danger made. Something struck the far window then, a hard crack, like a stone or a shot too distant to trust. Dante moved in front of me, so fast the air seemed to split around him. 1 second I was staring at the Madonna's half-cleaned halo, and the next I was shoved behind the broad line of his body, my shoulder catching the edge of the easel as he drove me down. The cloth slid, wood thudded. Glass starred white across the tall window panes without breaking, not stone, bulletproof. Outside, men were already shouting. Gianni came through the door with a gun in his hand and murder in his face. "North Garden," he said. "One shooter, maybe two. We're sweeping." Dante did not look away from the windows. Alive if possible. If possible. It was the sort of mercy men like him granted only when information was worth more than blood. My pulse had gone narrow and vicious. I heard it in my teeth. I heard my own breath. I heard the tiny, obscene calm in Dante's voice when he said, "Stay behind me. I can hear you without the performance." His head turned a fraction. "This is not performance." No, it was. That was the worst of it. He stayed in front of me until Gianni crossed to the pane and inspected the spidered impact. The bullet had hit high, too high for my body if I had been standing where I was a second earlier. Not meant for me, meant for the painting. I stood slowly. It was a warning. Dante glanced back. "Yes, he knows it's here. He always did." I looked at him properly then tell me the rest. Something cold passed over his expression, not anger, a decision. Gianni murmured into his earpiece and left to coordinate the search. The door shut behind him with padded finality. Dante waited until the gallery was empty before saying, "Luca Morti was taken into my father's household when he was 14. The words landed with a strange, delayed force. "Taken how? His mother died, his father drank himself useless, my father called it charity. And you?" I called him brother. The room went very still, not brother by blood. That would have been simpler. Blood could be hated cleanly. Chosen loyalty rotted slower. Dante walked to the painting, stopping just short of the panel. He learned our houses, our accounts, our silences. He learned what men hide when they want the world to keep calling them honorable. His jaw tightened once. He also learned what I would forgive. I thought of the line in the church, the way he had spoken Luca's name as if it offended his mouth. "What happened?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. A warehouse burned 9 years ago. The scar beneath his collar seemed darker in the cool light. My sister was inside. There it was. Not the whole wound, but the clean edge of it. I felt my own anger rearrange itself around something older and more terrible. And Luca, Dante's gaze stayed on the Madonna. I vouched for him that night. I said he had nothing to do with the shipment that drew the attack. I was wrong. The last word came out flat, stripped of any protection language usually carries. Wrong, not misled, not betrayed. Wrong. I understood then why softness offended him. Softness had once cost him a girl with his family's eyes. Outside, somewhere below the cliff, a dog started barking. Another joined it. Men moved in the garden like the weather turning violent. "And my father," I said quietly. Dante finally looked at me. "Your father hid something in this panel before he died. Luca has been trying to find it for months. He thought humiliating you publicly would flush it into the open." A fresh kind of shame tried to rise in me then, white and choking. He saw it. Of course he saw it. "This was not your doing," he said. "No," my voice came sharper than I intended. "It was his, and I would like very much to make that expensive for him." That stopped him. Not because I had surprised him with anger. Men like Dante expected anger, but because I had offered it without trembling. His eyes lowered once to my hands. "Can you uncover what your father hid?" "Yes." "How long?" "It depends how careful you want me to be." He stepped closer then, though not close enough to touch. "Never that unless he meant to break the room with it." "As careful as necessary," he said. "As fast as possible." I nodded. He reached into his pocket and set something on the edge of the easel between us. The silver cufflink, its little saint's sword caught the light. "A reminder?" I asked. "A promise," he said. "Of what?" His gaze moved to the cracked window, then back to me. "That nobody fires into my house twice." He discovered what my hands were for. By noon, the West Conservatory had become mine. Or rather, It had become the kind of temporary kingdom powerful men build when they decide a woman's skill is useful enough to respect. Tables appeared. Solvents, cotton swabs, lamps, magnifiers, scalpels fine as eyelashes, humidity monitors, nitrile gloves in 3 sizes, a rolling cart with enough conservation supplies to make a museum jealous. I stood in the center of it and looked at Dante. You keep all this on hand? No. Then how? I made a call, that was all. I should have stopped being startled by how quickly his will became architecture, but I had known him less than 2 days. I was still adjusting to the scale of him. The Madonna panel rested beneath diffuse light, while I examined the surface through magnification. Later varnish had yellowed over the original blue mantle, and beneath the halo I found the faintest disruption in the craquelure, too geometric to be age, too deliberate to be accident. My father. Not a message left for priests or patrons, a message left for somebody who knew how to look. Dante watched from the far end of the room with the rigid patience of a man trying not to interfere with something he could not dominate by force. He had taken off his jacket again. His sleeves were rolled to the forearms. That should not have felt intimate. It did. You can tell already, he asked. There's a secondary resin layer over part of the original surface, and in a language I speak, it means somebody sealed something beneath beauty because they wanted it preserved. His gaze sharpened. Your father, yes. I touched the cotton swab to the edge of the halo and began the slow work of reduction. Minutes passed in silence. Then, you don't shake. I glanced up. Excuse me, your hands. His eyes stayed on them. After the church, after this morning. They don't shake. I looked back at the painting because it was easier than looking at him when his voice went that quiet. My father said panic belongs in the chest. Never in the fingers. And if it reaches the fingers, then you ruin whatever you're trying to save. Something unreadable moved through his face. He understood ruined things too well. That much had become obvious. By mid-afternoon, Oscar appeared in the doorway carrying an espresso and the expression of a man eager to survive boredom through commentary. I've been sent to check whether anyone in this room has become unbearable, he announced. Bad news, boss. Your score is high. Dante did not turn. Leave. Oscar came farther in instead. Rosa says the geese got into the lemon beds again. I blinked. You have geese. Oscar went pale in a way I would not have believed possible in a grown man with a pistol at his back. Not mine, he said tightly. The devils, they come from the neighboring property and cross boundaries like criminals. They're birds. They're organized. Despite myself, I laughed. Oscar pointed at me in vindication. See, she understands suffering. Dante's mouth shifted just once at the corner. Not a smile. The memory of one maybe from a harder life. Oscar saw it and nearly crossed himself. Madonna, the bride is making miracles. Out, Dante said. Oscar retreated with theatrical dignity. If I'm found mauled in the garden, tell Maria the florist I died brave. When the room quieted again, I found Dante still watching me. Not my face, my hands. Something about that made the air feel narrower. You can ask it, I said. Ask what? What you're trying not to. He held my eyes a beat too long. What else did your father teach you to hide? The question should have angered me. Instead, it opened a tired place. He taught me how to repair paint without touching the underdrawing. How to mend torn canvas from the back. How to tell when a priest was lying about provenance. I wet another swab, working carefully along the mantle's edge. He also taught me to keep cash in flour tins and never trust a man who is charming too quickly. And yet you accepted Luca. I stilled. There it was. Not accusation, not quite. But near enough to bruise. I accepted the version of him that courted widows, remembered feast days, and brought me coffee after long shifts. I placed the swab down with care. You accepted him as a brother. The silence after that had teeth. When I finally looked up, Dante had gone completely still. Well, fair was fair, At dusk, Gianni entered with a flat white box. This came through the front gate. Dante took it before I could move. The florist's paper around it was expensive. The ribbon cream. Inside lay a bouquet of white lilies, fresh, perfect, cruel. On top was a folded card. You always looked best waiting. No signature. There did not need to be one. Something volcanic and icy happened at once inside my chest. The church came back in one blinding sweep, whispers, pity, crushed stems in my hand. Dante read the note once. Then he closed the box and handed it to Gianni. "Burn it." Gianni nodded and left. I stared at the empty doorway. "I want him dead." The words came out so simply I almost did not recognize my own voice. Dante did. He stepped closer, not gently, but with a sort of grave attention. "Eventually," he said, "but first I want him afraid." Then he picked up the silver cufflink from beside the lamp where he had left it that morning and turned it once between his fingers. A small metallic click. "You keep hearing that sound," he said. I did not deny it. His gaze darkened with something I was learning to recognize as dangerous honesty. "So do I," he admitted. The first moment mattered. That night the storm came in over the sea like judgment. Wind rattled the old shutters. Rain struck the stone in silver sheets. The power failed once, recovered, then failed again hard enough to throw the hallway into darkness. I had been in the small family chapel at the center of the east wing because I could not sleep and because old churches, unlike most people, had never lied to me. The candles there were real wax, real smoke, real flame. No electricity required. Saints looked down from shadowed niches with chipped faces and patient grief. I was lighting a taper when the door opened behind me. Dante entered carrying a lantern, all gold edges and darkness beneath them. "You're supposed to be upstairs." I was raised Catholic enough to know hiding from storms rarely improves them. His gaze moved over the chapel, then to the candle already lit in my hand. "You pray, sometimes. For what? That depends on the day." He set the lantern down near the altar rail. Thunder rolled above us, low and monstrous. For a moment the whole chapel flashed white through the narrow stained glass windows. I said, "Tonight I was considering asking God whether humiliating men can be struck selectively." That almost got me another ghost of a smile. "Useful theology," he said. I leaned the taper into sand. "Did you come to forbid this room too?" "No." "Then why are you here?" He did not answer at once, which meant the answer mattered. Finally he said, "Because this is where my mother used to go when the house was loud." Not confession, but close. Rain shuddered over the roof again. The chapel smelled of wax and wet stone, and the faint mineral scent of old incense caught forever in the walls. I turned to face him fully. "In the gallery, you said Luca became dangerous because my father hid something." "That isn't the whole truth." "No, then give me the part you're holding." He stood in silence so long I thought he might leave with it. Instead he said, "At the altar when you reach for my wrist." He looked away briefly toward the candles. That was the moment. I felt something small and sharp move beneath my ribs. What moment? The one where this stopped being strategy. I did not breathe. His voice stayed even, which somehow made it worse. "You should have hated me first. Most people do when I enter a room like that. You should have recoiled. You should have asked whether the offer came with chains." He flexed his hand once at his side, as if memory still lived there. "Instead you saw something out of place and corrected it. The cufflink, yes, it was crooked. I know, no one had fixed it." His laugh then was brief and without humor. "No one in my life touches me to calm me, Adriana." He said my name like something discovered in a locked drawer. "They touch me to flatter, to manipulate, to survive." His eyes came back to mine, dark and terrible and more open than they had any right to be. "You touched me because something was wrong and you could not bear leaving it wrong." Thunder struck so near the stained glass trembled. I could think of nothing to say that would not make the room worse, So I told the truth. I wasn't trying to soothe you. I know. I was trying not to fall apart. That too. The chapel tightened around us. And that made me dangerous to you, I said. His mouth moved slightly. You have no idea. I hated that my pulse answered him. I hated more that part of me did not. He took one step closer. The lantern gold caught on the scar at his throat and made it look freshly cut. You asked for no lies, he said. So here is one I won't tell. I did not marry you out of pity. I looked up into that controlled, brutal face and believed him with an immediacy that felt like stepping off a roof. What did you marry me out of then? His answer came low. Need. A different kind of lightning passed through me then, not in the sky, in the body. I gripped the back of the pew to steady myself. He saw that too, because he saw everything. If this is where you pretend it's love, I said, trying for cold and finding breathless instead, we agreed against that. He came another half step. Close enough now that I could smell clean rain on wool, and the darker warmth beneath it. I'm not pretending anything, he said. Love is a word men use when they want to sound harmless. The storm broke over the house in one violent sheet of sound. My hand slipped on the pew rail. His moved on instinct catching my wrist. Heat, bare skin. We both went still. He released me at once, but the damage was already done. Rule broken, not by pity, that made it worse. I looked at his hand. He looked at my mouth. Neither of us forgave the other for it. Then Rose's voice carried faintly from the hallway, calling for candles and swearing about the fuse box in language saints probably frowned upon. The spell snapped. Dante stepped back first. Of course he did. He had more practice with retreat than I did. At dawn, he said, voice rougher than before, you'll show me what your father hid. He picked up the lantern. At the door, he paused only once. Little saint, he said without turning, if I ever start to sound harmless, you should be more frightened than you are now. Then he left me in the candlelight with my pulse in ruins and the storm still hammering the sea. My father had left truth under a saint's blue robe. The hidden writing emerged by noon. Not all at once. My father had been too clever for that. He embedded the marks beneath later retouching in a lattice fine enough to pass for devotional ornament, unless cleaned by someone patient, trained, and a little desperate. Which, unfortunately for Luca Morti, described me perfectly. Under magnification, the Madonna's blue mantle resolved into repeating strokes that were not decorative at all but numerical. Dates. Port codes. Account strings disguised as folds of paint. On the lower panel, nearly invisible beneath a repaired crack, sat a tiny sword through a halo, the same as Dante's cufflink. I sat back on my stool and felt cold. Dante, Tommaso Ricci, and Father Matteo stood behind me in a line that would have looked comical if it had not felt so much like a tribunal. Tommaso was lean, beautifully dressed, and carried legal exhaustion in his posture. Father Matteo simply looked betrayed by the existence of hidden financial crime inside the Virgin's sleeve. Tommaso adjusted his glasses. Can this be authenticated? Yes, I said. My father used his own hand in the overglaze. I know his pressure. I know the tilt in his numeral forms. I pointed with the thin bamboo stick. This here, he always made sevens like that when he was tired. Father Matteo crossed himself. Your father hid ledgers in sacred art. My father hid something in the one place greedy men would either overlook or profane too quickly to understand. Dante's gaze never left the panel. Read the numbers. Tommaso stepped in with a notebook. We worked line by line, me revealing, him transcribing. Offshore accounts, shipping dates, names attached to shell charities. Bribes routed through restoration grants, church donations, orphanage repairs. And woven through it all, Luca, not just recent theft, years of it. Years of siphoning funds through Salvator routes, Morty fronts, and ecclesiastical cover. Enough to buy politicians, enough to start wars, enough to fund a fire. My stomach turned. Tommaso went very still halfway down the left border. Dante, I looked up. What? He didn't answer me. He handed the notebook to Dante instead. Dante read one line. Nothing changed in his face. That frightened me more than anger would have. I stood. Tell me. He looked at me once, then passed me the page. There, embedded between account transfers and coded shipments, was an entry tied to the warehouse fire 9 years earlier. Payment authorized through Luca using a false intermediary. The retaliatory attack had not been misfortune. It had been purchased movement, designed pressure, calculated escalation, and Sofia Salvator had died in its path. My hand tightened so hard on the paper it crinkled. He knew, I whispered. He knew what would happen. He thought he could control it, Dante said. I looked up so quickly the room blurred. That is not better. No. For the first time since I had met him, something raw showed plain in his eyes. Not softness, never that, but old self-disgust cut so deep it had polished into steel. Father Matteo sat down heavily in one of the gallery chairs as if his knees had stopped believing in him. God forgive him. Dante's voice went flat. No, silence spread. I returned to the panel, forcing my fingers to work. Hidden at the lower edge of the throne beneath the Madonna's hand was another mark, a cypress tree and a crescent line that could have been a hill or a road. Tommaso leaned in. Another location, I stared harder. No, I said slowly, a chapel profile, coastal. My father sketched places the way some men remember addresses. Father Matteo looked up sharply. Santa Lucia al Mare, Dante turned. What is that? A private chapel once attached to the old Morty estate, the priest said, half ruined now. Used only for feast day mass in summer, when the weather is forgiving and the families are pretending to be civilized. Of course. Luca had staged his humiliation in a cathedral and hidden his greed behind saints. The symmetry would have pleased him. I stripped my gloves off. There's more there. Dante looked at Gianni, who had appeared at the door without me noticing. Prepare the cars. Father Matteo began. Perhaps caution. Caution is why we're going, Dante said. Tommaso shut his notebook. If this second site contains confirming documents, I can move on the accounts tonight. Do it. The men shifted immediately into purpose. Orders, routes, security, timing. I stood very still in the center of it, breathing in old varnish and old deceit. Dante waited until the others had moved out before coming to me. You don't have to come. I stared at him. It was my father's hand. That's exactly why, and it's my life he used as bait. His eyes darkened. Yes, then I'm going. For a beat I thought he might forbid it. Instead he said, stay close to me. I should have objected to the tone. What I did instead was reach past him to the work table and pick up the silver cufflink where he had set it beside the solvents. I turned it once, listening to the saint's little sword click against my nail. Then I placed it in his palm. I intend to, I said. Blood looked different on a man who never flinched. We left at dusk. Naples fell away behind us in terraces of gold and laundry and hard, bright life. The road to Santa Lucia al Mare curved above the darkening water, lined with cypress and old stone walls furred with ivy. Oscar drove like a man personally offended by the existence of blind turns. I hate coastal roads, he declared. No room for error, too much dramatic symbolism. You complain more when you're frightened, Gianni said from the front passenger seat. Oscar is always frightened, Dante replied. Correct, Oscar said. That's what keeps me alive. I sat in the back beside Dante with Father Matteo's folded map in my lap and the sea flashing silver below us through breaks in the trees. The chapel lay ahead, ruined and small and dangerous in the way forgotten holy places often are. Tell me about your sister, I said before I could decide not to. Dante looked out the window. For a long moment I thought he would refuse. Then, Sofia was 17, too clever, too certain I could fix anything. The words were spare, but the grief beneath them was cathedral-sized. She used to steal the sugared almonds from wedding tables before the cakes were cut, he said. She said ceremonies were easier to survive if you robbed them first. I smiled despite the ache of it. He noticed, his gaze lowered briefly to my mouth, then away. I would have liked her, I said. Yes, he said, too quietly. That's part of the problem. The chapel appeared at the end of a narrow spur road, perched above the sea like something left behind by a more faithful century. White plaster gone gray. Bell tower cracked, wooden doors warped with salt. Men swept it first. Only when Gianni signaled clear did Dante let me out. Inside, the air was damp with mildew, candle smoke, and neglect. Faded saints peeled from the walls. The altar cloth had long since yellowed into surrender. But behind the side transept, above a small votive niche, I saw it immediately, a panel backing newer than the surrounding wood. My father again. You hid things in churches like a spy, I murmured. Good men who run out of options often do, Father Matteo said softly. I climbed the shallow steps and examined the backing. Dante stayed close enough that the heat of him reached me whenever I leaned. Not touching, just there. Knife, I said. He handed me one. I worked the blade under the edge of the panel backing and lifted carefully. Inside sat a wrapped oilcloth packet no larger than a prayer book. Tommaso swore under his breath when I passed it down. He opened it on the altar. Original bank letters, signature copies, transfer authorizations, enough evidence to bury Luca legally, financially, and possibly by whatever remained of God's bookkeeping. Then the first shot came, not at the altar, at the doorway. Wood exploded inward. Father Matteo shouted. Gianni dragged the priest behind the side pews. Oscar, who had apparently ceased being comic relief, the moment bullets started, pulled me down so hard my knees hit stone. Dante fired back once, twice, moving toward the entrance with the terrible economy of a man to whom violence was simply another language. More shots, echoing, close. I pressed myself behind the crumbling baptismal font and heard somebody outside scream. Then Dante staggered, only a step, only slightly, but enough. Dante, stay down. Blood spread dark along his left side just below the ribs. The sight of it rearranged the world. Gianni and Oscar pushed forward together, returning fire while Dante dropped behind the doorway pillar. Rain from the earlier storm still slicked the threshold. One of Luca's men went down hard on the steps and did not rise. Then, as suddenly as it had started, silence. Not safety, never that, but silence. Gianni's voice crackled through the wrecked air. They're pulling back. Oscar kicked a fallen pistol away and said, breathless, cowards, deeply inconsiderate cowards. I was already at Dante's side. He had one hand pressed to his ribs. Blood seeped between his fingers in a line too bright against the black fabric. It's through and through, he said. How comforting. Adriana, be quiet. I pushed his hand aside and examined the wound. Grazed, not lodged, angry but survivable. My hands did not shake. His eyes found them and held. Of course they don't, he said, almost to himself. Oscar tore strips from an abandoned altar linen while muttering about sacrilege and poor planning. I bound Dante's side with pressure so tight his jaw clenched. Does it hurt? I asked. He gave me a look so offended I might have laughed if blood were not soaking my fingers. You've been shot, I said. I noticed. I tied the knot and looked up. He was watching me the way he had in the studio, the way he had in the church. Like my hands were doing something far worse than preserving him. For one impossible second, the ruined chapel, the gunpowder, the shouting outside, all of it fell away. Then Gianni said, we need to move. Reality returned with teeth. Dante rose. So did I before we stepped back into the night. His hand closed lightly around my wrist. Not command, not restraint. Something nearer gratitude, though he would rather bleed than name it. Stay with me, he said. This time I did not mistake it for an order. He told me what loyalty had cost him back at the palazzo. Rosa took one look at Dante's bandaged side and began issuing orders in a voice usually reserved for plague and incompetent men. Oscar received a kitchen towel to the head for bleeding on the marble. Gianni disappeared to coordinate security. Tommaso locked himself in the study with the documents and enough bourbon to prosecute a republic. I found Dante later in the library. He had changed shirts. The clean white linen over the dressing on his side only made the damage beneath it more visible. He stood at the window with one hand braced on the frame, to see a black sheet below the glass. "You should be lying down," I said. "You sound like Rosa." "She sounds correct." He glanced back. "That happens occasionally." I came farther in, closing the door behind me. The library was all leather, lamplight, and rain-damp air. Books climbed the walls like old judgment. On the table between the armchairs sat the packet from the chapel, now opened fully. And among the bank letters lay a smaller envelope in my father's hand. For Adriana, if I cannot explain this myself. My throat closed. Dante said nothing while I opened it. Inside was a single page. "My dearest girl, if you are reading this, then I have failed to finish matters cleanly. There are men who dress greed like duty and men who call violence inheritance. Trust neither. If Luca Morti courts you, understand it is not your heart he wants, but what he believes I left in your keeping. I never trusted him. I feared, however, that one day he would need you shamed enough to stop looking at him clearly. If Dante Salvator is the man beside you when this is found, know that he is dangerous but not careless. There is a difference. It may save your life." I had to sit down. For a moment all I could hear was paper in my hands and blood in my ears. He knew. My father had known. Not every detail, perhaps, but enough to try to leave me warning wrapped inside paint and prayer. I laughed once, and it came out sounding almost like grief breaking its own teeth. Dante lowered himself into the chair opposite mine, with more control than comfort. "Your father saw further than most. He also let me walk toward Luca. He may have thought he had more time." I folded the page carefully because if I did not treat it gently, I might start screaming. "Everyone always thinks that." Silence. Then Dante said, "You asked about the fire." I looked up. He leaned back, one hand resting over the bandage at his side. "Luca came to me the night before. Said he needed access to one of the warehouse routes for a fast transfer. I told him no. He argued. We drank. He made it sound small, temporary. I gave him the code anyway. The library seemed to dim around the words. The shipment drew a rival crew, he said. Retaliation escalated. Sophia was there, because she came to bring me papers I'd forgotten at home. She wanted to prove she could be useful. His voice went flatter, not from lack of feeling, but because feeling that deep had to be held at gunpoint. I chose loyalty to the wrong boy for one night. I stared at him. There it was again, that merciless honesty. Not I was betrayed, I chose wrong. I spent years thinking if I had seen him clearly sooner, she would have lived. His eyes lifted to mine. "So when you looked at me in that church and saw me clearly at all, He stopped. I waited. The room waited, and finally he said the rest. "I wanted something from you I had no right to want." The air left me in a slow, dangerous wave. "What?" "Absolution," he said. Then more. His gaze dropped once to my hands resting on my lap. "I'm still not certain which is worse. I should have protected myself then. I should have reminded him of rules, contracts, 1 year, no pretending. Instead I heard myself ask, and now?" His answer came without hesitation. "Now I want everything." The honesty of it hit harder than tenderness would have. I stood because sitting felt impossible. He stood too, slower because of the wound. We faced each other in lamplight and rain-thick silence, my father's letter between us like a blessing neither of us trusted. "You are impossible," I whispered. "So I've been told." That wasn't admiration. I know, still he stepped closer. I should have moved back, I did not. His hand lifted. Not to touch my face, not yet, but as if the thought had become physical before discipline dragged it to a stop in the air between us. Then a phone rang somewhere in the house. We both froze. Gianni's voice sounded in the corridor, fast, hard. Luca had called, and everything gentle in the room died at once. The man who ruined me wanted an audience. Luca did not call Dante. He called me. Gianni put the phone on speaker in the study with Tommaso, Oscar, Father Matteo, and enough armed silence to qualify as a militia. Dante stood beside me with both hands flat on the desk like he might split the wood if he loosened his grip. "Adriana," Luca said, and his voice was exactly as I remembered it. Warm, cultivated, easy. The kind of voice women trusted and men underestimated until too late. The sound of it made my skin crawl. "You look lovely in white," he went on. I was sorry to miss the ending. Dante's jaw went white. I spoke before he could. "You staged a church like a coward." Luca laughed softly. "No, Cara. I staged a revelation." Oscar muttered something about feeding him to geese. Tommaso shushed him without looking away from the call trace screen. "You wanted the ledgers," I said. "I wanted what your father stole before he died. He hid evidence of what you stole. Semantics." My nails bit crescents into my palm. "You humiliated me to flush out paper." "To flush out protection," he corrected. "I knew Dante would never let you leave that cathedral destroyed in public. He is too proud, too territorial. Too much my brother still." At that, something in Dante moved, not outward but inward, the way a blade withdraws before the next strike. "You are not his brother," I said. Luca exhaled like a man indulging a child. "You'd be surprised what people remain to each other after blood is spilled." Dante leaned toward the phone. "Where are you?" A pause. "Then still giving orders like they matter." "They do, only if you are willing to burn everything this time." The line crackled. Luca's voice lost some of its polish then, enough to reveal the rot beneath. "Tell him, Adriana. Tell him how it feels to be displayed. Tell him what it costs to stand in front of a room and realize everyone is watching you be reduced." I went cold, not because of what he said, because of how personal it sounded. Because for one grotesque instant I understood that my humiliation had not been incidental to him. It had pleased him. "You wanted me broken," I said. "No," he said softly. "I wanted you visible." The whole room seemed to lean in around that word. Visible, not loved, not chosen, displayed. Luca continued, voice almost dreamy now. "Your father made you careful. I always wondered what it would take to make you stop being careful." I heard Dante breathe once beside me, and it sounded like murder trying on a human shape. "You set the fire," I said. Silence, brief and thrilled. Then Luca said, "I set many things in motion." Father Matteo made a sound like prayer failing. Tommaso held up 2 fingers at Dante, trace nearly complete. I said, "Why Sophia?" The question was a knife I hadn't known I was holding until it was already in him. Luca's answer came stripped of pretense. "Because Dante always chose responsibility over affection, and I wanted to see if guilt would make him easier to lead." Dante closed his eyes once. When he opened them, there was nothing human left in them I recognized. Tommaso mouthed the address. An old coastal villa, Morty property. Luca heard something in the change of silence and smiled through the speaker. "Come if you like. Bring her if you're foolish. Leave her if you're weak. Either way, one of you disappoints me." The line died. No one spoke for a full second. Then Dante looked at Gianni. "Cars, at me?" "No." The word landed before I had even opened my mouth. I stared at him. "You are joking." "I'm not. He called me. He wants you there." "Yes," I said, "which is exactly why he won't expect me to be useful." Oscar astonishingly nodded. "She has a point." Dante did not even look at him. "No." I stepped around the desk until I was directly in front of him. The study went utterly still. Men like Gianni knew when not to breathe between married people who had skipped straight past tenderness into war. "You promise no lies," I said quietly. "Do not insult me with protection that is really control." His gaze dropped to mine, black and furious, and afraid in ways he would rather die than name. "This is not control. This is fear." That hit good, his hands clenched at his sides. "Yes," he said, "the truth of it shook me more than any denial would have. I softened before I meant to." "Dante." He came very close then, close enough that everyone else in the room ceased to matter. "If he gets his hands on you," he said, voice low and lethal, "I won't come back from what I do." Something dangerous opened in my chest, not because the words were beautiful, because they were not. Because they were true, I lifted my chin. "Then don't let him." For one suspended beat I thought he might still refuse. Then he looked at Gianni and said, "She stays beside me." And the room exhaled all at once. He killed the man he might have become. The Morty villa had once been grand. Now it stood above the sea like an expensive corpse, shutters hanging wrong, marble split with salt, garden statues blind with lichen. The chapel attached to the east wing was blackened at one side from some old fire nobody had bothered to repair. That detail turned my blood to ice. We entered in silence broken only by shoes on stone and the hushed click of weapons being readied. Gianni's men fanned through the lower rooms. Oscar, to his everlasting irritation, was ordered to stay with me until Dante nearly changed his mind and assigned both of them to me. "Very flattering," Oscar whispered. "I'm apparently equal to one small army." The main salon waited at the heart of the house, candlelit like a parody of elegance. Luca stood beside the fireplace in a dark suit, as immaculate as if he had come to dinner instead of treachery. He looked exactly like the man I had once mistaken for kindness. That may have been the ugliest part. "You came," he said. Dante stepped forward. "You sound surprised." Luca's eyes moved to me. "You less so. You always did need answers, and you always did need spectators." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Sharp tonight." He gestured lazily toward the chapel arch. On the side table beneath it lay a ledger box scorched at the edges. "The originals," he said, "or what remains. Your father was sentimental. He kept copies of everything." Tommaso moved slightly, calculating distance and evidentiary value even now. Dante said, "You set the fire." Luca shrugged one shoulder. "Years ago, indirectly. Tonight." "Not yet." My skin went cold again. "Not yet. I never meant Sophia," he said, and somehow that was the cruelest thing he could have chosen. But Dante always did build his tragedies out of opportunities I merely pointed toward. Dante did not move. I had begun to understand that stillness in him. It meant the violence had gone too deep for display. Luca looked at me again. "Tell me, Adriana, when he married you at the altar, did it feel like rescue?" "No," I said. "It felt like a better class of threat." For the first time, Luca looked genuinely irritated. "Good," Dante said softly. Then the room exploded. Two of Luca's men opened from the balcony above. Glass shattered. Candles went over. Gianni's men fired back. Oscar dragged me behind the overturned piano with language inventive enough to alarm several saints. Through the chaos I saw Luca back toward the chapel arch with the scorched ledger box in hand. Dante saw it too. He moved. The fight shifted like a storm front, shouting, smoke, splintered wood. Someone screamed from the staircase. Father Matteo, who had insisted on coming only to wait outside and pray, would probably lose 10 years off his life when he heard what followed. I broke from Oscar when Luca vanished through the chapel door. "Adriana!" Too late, I ran. The chapel beyond was narrower than the one at Santa Lucia, but more ruined. Part of the ceiling had already fallen in. Salt wind pushed through the broken rose window. Luca stood at the far end near the old altar, breathing hard, the ledger box tucked under one arm and a lighter in his other hand. "You should have stayed behind him," he said. I did that once, and it improved my opinion of danger. His smile came wrong. You think he can love you without destroying you. I think you don't know the difference between wanting and owning. That landed. Ugly men hate being named precisely. He flicked the lighter once. Flame rose small and obscene in the ruined dark. Your father was a fool, he said. He thought paper could save people. No, I said. He thought truth could damn the right men. Luca's eyes hardened. Then watch. He threw the lighter toward the old altar cloth. Fire took fast, too fast oil. He had prepared it. Smoke climbed in black ropes. Heat struck my face. For one terrible instant another story sat over this one. Sophia trapped, Dante too late. Then Dante came through the side arch like vengeance given bones. He hit Luca hard enough to drive him into the stone rail. The ledger box fell. Papers burst loose. Fire crawled greedily up the steps. The two men struggled in the spreading heat. All the years between them finally stripped down to muscle, rage, and old betrayal. Luca laughed once even with Dante's hand at his throat. There you are. I grabbed the ledger papers, stamping sparks out with my heel. Smoke thickened. Dante drove Luca back again, but Luca had a knife now flashing silver in the firelight. Dante, he turned in time to take the slash along his shoulder instead of his throat. Then everything happened at once. Luca lunged past him, toward me, maybe for the papers, maybe for my wrist. Maybe because humiliation, once begun, had to end with possession. He never reached me. Dante caught him from behind and with a terrible final economy, drove the knife into Luca's ribs and then again higher, where life retreats fastest. The sound Luca made was small, human. That was the horror of it. Dante held him there a second too long, forehead almost touching his as the fire climbed higher around the altar. When Luca sagged, Dante let him fall. No triumph. No speech. Just a man standing over the body of the boy he had once called brother. Gianni burst in with 2 men and blankets for the fire. Oscar appeared behind him coughing, wild-eyed, alive. Everyone out, he shouted. I would like to survive one religious building this week. I should have moved first. Instead, I went to Dante. He was staring down at Luca with the dead expression of someone who had finally reached the edge of an old sentence. I touched his wrist. Not his face, not his wound, his wrist. The place where it had all started. His eyes came to mine through smoke. Dante, I said, that brought him back. He bent, retrieved the fallen silver cufflink from where it had skidded across the chapel floor during the struggle. I did not know when it had come loose, and put it into my hand as if entrusting me with a relic. Then we walked out of the burning chapel together while the sea threw black light at the cliffs below. The second time it meant home. 3 days later the house was quieter, not peaceful. Peace was a fragile thing, and Dante Salvator's world was built from older materials than that, but quieter. Tommaso had spent those days turning ledgers into warrants, seizures, disappearances of money. And the sort of legal avalanches rich families pretend cannot happen to them until the mountain is already moving. Rosa cooked as if feeding people were the one argument left against death. Oscar informed everyone that surviving gunfire entitled him to 2 desserts and immunity from cardio forever. Luca Morti was buried privately. Dante did not attend. On the morning he came back down to breakfast wearing black, I knew where he had gone instead, to Sophia. The knowledge sat between us, while Rosa bullied coffee into existence, and Oscar gave a solemn account of nearly being martyred by smoke inhalation and poor architecture. Gianni stood by the terrace doors pretending not to notice the weight in the room. Dante had his jacket on, white shirt, dark tie today finally. His left cuff was unfastened, crooked. My heartbeat stumbled exactly once. He reached for the chair across from mine and I said, "Stop." The whole table went still. Oscar looked as if he might volunteer to fling himself through a window on behalf of everyone present. I stood and crossed to Dante before good sense could interfere. He watched me come with that grave, unreadable attention I had learned was most dangerous when aimed entirely at me. Without a word, I lifted my hand to his wrist. The room might as well have emptied. I turned the silver cufflink straight. The little saint's sword clicked softly into place. Same gesture, different woman, different man, not a cathedral full of whispers now. Not pity circling like carrion, morning light, coffee, salt air off the sea, Rosa pretending to fuss with bread so she would not smile. Oscar openly failing not to cry over something he would later call dust. Dante looked down at my hand still resting at his cuff. "What are you doing?" he asked, and his voice was low enough that only I heard the fracture in it. I answered just as quietly. "Putting one small piece of your world back into order." His eyes changed. There it was again, the first vow that had mattered. Only now I knew what lived behind it: grief, guilt, hunger, restraint, and the terrible relief of being seen by someone who did not look away. "I told you 1 year," he said. "Yes, you can still leave at the end of it. I know," his gaze held mine. "I could let you leave now." That was how I understood the depth of what had happened in the chapel, not from the killing. From this. From the fact that a man built to hold titan things was standing in his own house, offering me freedom with blood still under the skin of his memory. I let my fingers slide once lightly over the straightened cuff. "No," I said, "not because I was trapped, not because he had rescued me, not because my humiliation needed a better ending. No, because somewhere between the altar and the fire and the sea, this dangerous man had become the place my fear no longer wanted to run from." His jaw shifted. "Adriana." It was the first time my name in his mouth sounded less like possession than prayer. I said, "You were wrong about one thing." That got his attention. "Only one," I almost smiled. "At the chapel, you said love is a word men use when they want to sound harmless. And maybe that is true for some men." Silence gathered itself around us, bright and trembling. "But not for you." Something in him gave way then, not visibly, not enough for anyone else to name it, but enough for me. Enough because I had learned him the way I learned paintings, by surface, crack, pressure, and what had been hidden under damage. His hand came up slowly and stopped at my waist, waiting. Always that dangerous courtesy when he meant something most. I nodded once. Only then did he touch me, not from pity, not from strategy, not from the need to own what another man had tried to ruin. He drew me closer with a care so devastating it nearly undid me, bent his forehead briefly to mine, and exhaled like a man setting down armor he had forgotten was crushing him. Around us, the house kept breathing. Rosa clattered plates louder than necessary to preserve dignity. Oscar whispered, "Madonna," as if personally vindicated by romance after all. Gianni looked out to sea with the heroic concentration of a man refusing to witness intimacy on company time. Dante said, for me alone, "Little saint." This time it did sound affectionate. This time it sounded a little like home. And when he kissed me at last, it was not to seal a bargain made in a church full of cruelty. It was to answer the vow we had been breaking toward all along.